What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, November 20th. Welcome to the Fantasy Football Fanatics podcast, the official podcast of thefantasyfootballfanatics.com. I'm your host, Griffin Palmer, joined by nobody. As you can maybe tell by the audio quality, lack of intro music. On the road again, so all by myself, but that's okay. That's not going to stop us from doing what we do. Today I'm going to give you the studs and duds recap from week number 11, top waiver targets for week number 12, all the stuff you need to know. Make sure you guys subscribe wherever you're listening. We're a year-round show, and make sure you guys rate, review the show. Helps the show out a ton. With that, let's move into why everybody's here. Let's get into some of the things we're going to talk about today. We'll start with these studs, these guys that won you your fantasy weeks, and we'll start with Patrick Mahomes, continuing to just annihilate fantasy football, going up for 478 yards, 6 passing touchdowns. What? 47.92 fantasy points is the end total. Holy hell, getting it done. On the other side, Jared Goff, 43.12 fantasy points, 413 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Also added another touchdown on the ground for 5 in total. Drew Brees comes in at third for 38.52 fantasy points, 163 yards, and 4 passing touchdowns. Other notable mentions, Cam Newton, 30.48 fantasy points, Andrew Luck, 29.88 fantasy points, and Aaron Rodgers, 25.58 fantasy points, your top performers of the week. With that, let's move on to the running backs that definitely won you your weeks, starting with Saquon Barkley. We hyped him up all off season, and it's starting to pay off for you. 33.2 fantasy points for 3 touchdowns, 142 yards on the ground, 2 rushing, 10 receiving yards for another touchdown, so 3 in total. Saquon Barkley, killing it. Ezekiel Elliott, another name not to forget, 26.1 fantasy points, 122 yards on the ground, a rushing touchdown, added another 79 yards through the air. Massive performance there. Philip Lindsay, a name that you may or may not remember, coming out of Denver, 79 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 27 yards through the air, sorry. So 22.6 fantasy points. Other notable mentions, Mark Ingram, not to be forgotten, 22.3 fantasy points. Aaron Jones getting it done yet again, 22.3 fantasy points as well. And Leonard Fournette, going against that Pittsburgh Steelers defense, 20.1 fantasy points, your top rushing quarterbacks, or running backs rather, on the week. And then a notable mention as well, Gus Edwards, Baltimore Ravens, basically 5th string running back, 19.5 fantasy points, 115 yards, and a rushing touchdown. The first running back all season long from Baltimore to go over 100 yards. Also got you a 2-point conversion, your top running backs on the week. Let's go to the wide receiver position. We have, for the second week in a row, at the top spot, Tyreek Hill, 33.5 fantasy points, 215 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Monster performance there. T.Y. Hill, not to be forgotten, in what looked to be a somewhat tough matchup against the Titans, 155 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, good for 27.5 fantasy points. DJ Moore, 157 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown for 21.7 fantasy points. Other notable mentions, Traquan Smith. You may know him, you may not. A wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. We've been talking to you guys about him for a couple weeks now. 21.7 fantasy points as well. Chris Conley, Kansas City Chiefs, 19.4 fantasy points. Stephon Diggs, 18.6. And Mike Evans, 18 fantasy points, your top performers on the week. And then to the tight end position. Travis Kelce, 18.7 fantasy points. Getting it done. Gerald Everett's, other side of the ball again, 16.9 fantasy points. So 127 yards and a touchdown for Kelce, 49 and 2 receiving touchdowns for Everett. And then Antonio Gates, still a thing. 14 fantasy points, 80 yards and a touchdown. Seems almost impossible, but here it is. Other notable mentions, Jordan Reed, 13.1 fantasy points. Jared Cook, 9.1 fantasy points. Vance McDonald, 8.7. Those were your top, and let's say O.J. Howard as well. 7.8 fantasy points, your top performers of the week. And now to the not-so-good performances. The guys who let you down. You have Carson Wentz, 0.84 fantasy points. What? Marcus Mariota, 3.1 fantasy points. Blake Bortles, 3.86. Alex Smith, 4.7. Ryan Fitzpatrick getting benched, 8.08. Deshaun Watson, 11.02. And Dak Prescott, 14.82. Those were your top duds of the week at the quarterback position. Running backs to let you down. Dalvin Cook, -1 fantasy points. Wendell Smallwood, -0.4 fantasy points. Javorius Buck Allen, the guy we thought was the number 2 guy in Baltimore, 0.2 fantasy points. how the Ravens run on 73% of their snaps, and one of their top running backs only gets 0.2 is beyond me. Devontae Booker, 0.4. Jamal Williams, 0.5. Latavius Murray, 0.5. Ty Montgomery, 0.5. Corey Clement, 1.5. Tyreek Cohen, 3. Deion Lewis, 3.2. Naheem Hines, 3.4. Carlos Hyde, 4.4. Rashad Penny, 4.6. Derrick Henry, 4.6. James Conner, big letdown, 4.9. Doug Martin, 5.8. And Jordan Howard, 6.5. Your top running back duds of the week. Wide receiver Sammy Watkins, 0.4 fantasy points in what was a crazy game. Don't really know how that happens. Laquan Treadwell, 0.7. Michael Crabtree, 0.7. Marquez Valdez Scantling, excuse me, 0.8 fantasy points. You have Michael Gallup, 1. D.D. Westbrook, 1.9. Tyrell Williams, 2.2. Sterling Shepard's 2.2. John Brown, 2.3. Corey Davis, 2.9. Josh Doxson, 3.2. Alshon Jeffrey, 3.3. Amari Cooper, 3.6. Calvin Ridley, 3.7. Jordan Matthews, 3.7. Deshaun Jackson, 3.8. Allen Robinson, 3.9. Devin Funchess, 3.9. Golden Tate, 4. Mike Williams, 5.6. Mohamed Sanu, 5.9. Emmanuel Sanders, 6.2. And Taylor Gabriel, 6.9. Your top duds of the week. And per usual, for the tight end duds, if you didn't hear the name already, if they weren't a stud, they were basically a dud. You might make an exception for Eric Dixon, 7.5, Greg Olsen, 6.9, Evan Ingram, 6.6. That's really about it. Other than that, a lot of duds that really let you down. So every other tight end, pretty disappointing, but that's per usual. With that, let's move on to some of the top headlines from around the league. Now, again, a lot of these news articles are not yet pending, or have not yet posted. They are still pending. We'll start at the quarterback position, where quarterback Alex Smith, I'll get there, for the Washington Redskins, he suffered a compound fracture. So this was described as a spiral fracture, and the bone stuck through the skin. He faces what is described to be a lengthy rehab process for his return. He has been placed on injured reserve by all accounts. Some have listed this as a career ender, and most likely will take well over a year's worth of recovery. Gruesome injury. Alex Smith, we will be surprised to see him. We wish him a speedy recovery, but we may not see him for the 2019 season either. So, obviously, we'll know more in the coming weeks once we get more news. That's just the general consensus. Tennessee Titans quarterback Marcus Mariota, he reportedly re-aggravated his injured throwing elbow. He also received a stinger. His status for Week 12 is uncertain. Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Jameis Winston is slated to start in Week number 12, and Baltimore Ravens quarterback Joe Flacco is not expected to be back for Week 12. Those are things to take into account when setting your lineups. Remember, Thanksgiving, there are games, so you have to set a lot of lineups before our next show. Let's move on to the running back news. Top headline for there: Detroit Lions running back Kerryon Johnson officially has a sprained knee, reportedly will not require surgery, and is listed as week to week and is not expected to play on Thanksgiving. So that's the top running back news as of this recording. Dallas Cowboys rookie wide receiver Michael Gallup is reportedly away from the team for an undisclosed period of time. He was recently informed that his brother took his own life. So thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Michael Gallup. Again, there's no estimated timetable for his return, nor should there be. So that is the status for him. And tight end news: Green Bay Packers tight end Jimmy Graham officially broke his thumb. He intends on playing in week number 12. However, his status still up in the air. We will see. With that, let's move on to some of our top waiver wire targets for week number 12. Now, since I'm the only one here, I gave you guys a couple of guys that I would be looking at for various reasons. For starters, I would look no farther than Gus Edwards. If you are really hurting at running back, the Ravens, they did a lot of weird things. A guy who had 15 carries all season long led the backfield. 17 carries, 115 yards, and a touchdown, where Alex Collins only got about 18 yards on the game. This may have been the system. This might have been that he's more versed in the read option offense that they're running with Lamar Jackson there. Either way, the situation remains the same going into week number 12, so Gus Edwards is a very interesting pickup and play for week 12. Get him if you need help at the position. Other guys worth noting, we have Detroit Lions running back Theo Riddick, Kerryon Johnson is down for an undisclosed period of time. Short week. Theo Riddick is there. Their most veteran back, Amir Abdullah, is gone. I would expect him to step in and be the lead back, only owned in 9.9% of leagues. Gus Edward, by the way, 0.1% of leagues. So you could get yourself a nice plug-in with Theo Riddick. And Elijah McGuire, 2.3% owned. New York Jets running back. Ever since he came back from injured reserve, he has been out there and challenging for the lead in snaps and touches. So it could be a very sneaky play. Definitely a good stash with Elijah McGuire. Those are the top running backs I would be targeting for week number 12. Wide receiver position, Josh Reynolds. Los Angeles Rams, massive performance this week, and I think that will continue. I think he's going to continue to fill in for Cooper Kupp as they shuffle the offense. He's going to get a lot of usage, and he's a guy that's widely available, only owned in 13.74% of leagues. Go pick him up. Traquan Smith, a guy we mentioned before, a top performer at the wide receiver position, New Orleans Saints. He's definitely an interesting pickup because Brandon Marshall wasn't active. He is an addition to the team. Traquan Smith has played well, so it could be Traquan Smith that will get the snaps and the playing time for now. Maybe they bring in Brandon Marshall as a red zone option. So as we kind of talked about last week, Brandon Marshall could be a boom-bust kind of touchdown-dependent guy. Traquan Smith looks like he's just going to be a guy you can trust on with a higher floor because he's used all around the field. So 4.1% of leagues he's owned. He's widely available. Could definitely be worth a pickup and play. And then DJ Moore, I mean, he's been coming on more and more. He's only owned in 12% of leagues. I would definitely look at getting your hands on him. Tight ends that are worth noting, there's not a lot going on here, so I'll simply say definitely don't look past Jonnu Smith. He had a decent week this week in what was just a terrible performance by the Titans. He was the one kind of silver lining, really, I felt, out of the entire offense. The running game wasn't good. The passing game wasn't good. I mean, obviously, injuries to the quarterback don't help. But Jonnu Smith, still heavily utilized. I think that he gives you a decent floor, and obviously the ceiling is pretty high. And then Cameron Brate, a guy we've told you to pick up in the past, owned in 6.2% of leagues. O.J. Howard, we didn't mention because we don't know much about his prognosis going forward. He got pretty banged up in this game. He's not expected to play in week number 12. Cameron Brate's in. Jameis Winston's in. We know what that matchup can yield, so Cameron Brate could be a guy who's worth picking up and playing for week 12, depending on your needs. And that'll be it. A very short show all by myself, so make sure you guys tune in on Friday when we'll be giving you our starts and sits for week number 12. Make sure you guys subscribe if you're listening. Follow the show on Twitter at the FF Fanatics. Submit all your questions there or individually. I'm at G Palmer FFF, and we will see you guys on Friday. So everyone, take care. Have a great week. Hopefully the cast will be back for that show. We'll see you then. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll be with you guys on Friday. Take care. Bye.